and welcome to another episode of Conversations with Real People at Individualists Unite. This episode is episode 1 of a conversation with Sam. If you haven't already done so, please, at your leisure, go to individualistunite.substack.com for all videos, podcasts, and everything else. You may also visit individualistunite.com for other featured content. Thanks for watching. This is, once again, Individualists Unite. I am the radical individualist, sometimes known as Chip, and this is Conversations with Real People. We have stringent standards, so first I need to make sure, Sam, are you a real person?
Indeed, I remain a real person.
Okay, good enough for me, good enough for everyone. Okay, we have no agenda. We talk about whatever comes up. Um, yeah, I'm going to let you talk first. What do you want to bring up?
Well, I think we should talk about the election.
Oh, okay. Is that the most important thing in your life?
Uh, One, I think now with the results, it's less important.
It certainly is current. The election was not when was it? It's at a
10 days
few
ago.
days, yeah, just a
Yeah.
few days really. So yeah, it's that makes it current.
Mhm.
Uh, okay, did the good guys win or not?
I think they did
Okay, because
because we are on the way to making America free again.
okay,
And
I think freedom is kind of relative. Some people feel inhibited when others feel free, and vice versa. Free means what to you?
well, I think freedom in our country is more or less distant from government overreach and so I think to your point on relativity, I think going
Right.
into a Trump administration, we're going to have less government reaching into our lives, reaching into our pockets
Mhm.
than during
Okay.
a Democrat administration. So,
Okay. Because yeah, like I said, freedom can mean different things to different people. But I think we agree on that. I don't want to spend all evening agreeing, so we better disagree on something. But
okay.
freedom to me is number one measured by how free we are from government. Um,
Yeah.
so there you go. I mean, I mentioned Toby once in a while. We have a dog who we love and he loves us and he loves being taken care of and seen to. Uh, you'd expect that from a dog, but people should be doing the taking care of, not being taken care of.
Hmm.
So, um, so yeah, the less government we've got, the better. And I'm old enough, boy, am I old enough to remember even when I was a kid, there's still a lot more federal government than there had been previously, but
Yeah.
there was a whole lot less than there is now. So we've been going, I think we agree, the wrong direction for a long time. Maybe it's
Definitely.
time to back it up some.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Hmm.
What do you think Trump is going to do that's right, and what is he going to do that's wrong? Because nobody's perfect. But for something, it's not going to go right.
Well, I think it's entirely dependent on how the Senate allows his agenda to go. I think he certainly has some inclinations that I would say are not headed in the right direction on any small given detail, whether that be election based or foreign policy based.
You think, let me catch up with you. Say he might be getting some things wrong there, or what?
I think he has the propensity to do so.
Okay.
Generally, I agree with most of the things that Trump does. Um, I think if I could forecast something that he would do wrong, I'd say probably eh, speaking with the hindsight of his first administration, I think the amount of drone strikes that he did, which surprisingly enough was an uptick from Obama's administration in the Mideast, is probably going to go on and probably in a heightened manner. I don't
Mhm.
think that's necessarily a good thing.
And are you talking essentially the Middle East or just other places?
Well, I mean, if you count Libya and such as the Middle East, which, you know, kind of isn't.
Yeah, the middle,
It's close
that's
enough.
Middle East to me. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
it is to me as
yeah.
well.
Um,
As far as good things he's going to do, um, as I mentioned before, decreasing regulation, having a massive influx of entrepreneurship. I think that's going to be great for the country.
mhm.
I think lowering taxes is going to spur massive economic growth.
Yeah. There's a thing that people get hung up on is the idea that how can lowering taxes spur the economy? But as some people point out, is it's not a fixed sum game.
Mhm.
Value is added by businesses essentially. It can be added all kinds of ways. But as a guy who was in business and produced stuff, I brought in this much material, and had this much overhead, and
Mhm.
this much labor costs, and let's say all of those costs add up to $1,000 at any given moment. The trick for me is to get $1,100 worth of something produced for those $1,000, and there's no
We,
guarantee. There's no frigging guarantee. You can
mhm.
end up with $900, and if you manage to make $2,000 worth out of $1,000 worth of input, you've doubled the value. Um, and people just think, well, this much money is this much money, and that's it. But no, the value appears like magic. When you start taxing the bejesus out of people, you're transferring money from here to there, but you've added no value. So yeah,
Right.
lowering taxes and let people invest it in whatever. And I say invest; it doesn't have to be buying stock. There's ways to invest, buy a house, whatever.
Absolutely.
Um, yeah, and
Or
I'd ask.
investing in yourself. I think to the point of what Trump could possibly do wrong, obviously the one thing that people have been pointing to is tariffs. Now I'm optimistic on the tariff part because of what we saw in 2016. In 2016 administration, the only sector of American producers that really suffered, American consumers didn't suffer virtually at all from tariffs on China, who was the producing nation primarily. The only producers Americans that really got hit were farmers,
Yeah,
agriculture. And why I'm not so concerned is because not only with the tariffs, as well as the USMCA and other trade agreements, the US government's general fund, let's say, had so much increased revenue relative to years prior that artificially, which I don't like, but I do like, was he essentially directed a small portion of that towards his
hmm,
farmers to stimulate their economic activity and kind of keep them at equilibrium so they could operate at
yeah. A lot of the tariffs
decent
he
levels.
collected went to the farmers, so he tried to
Exactly.
balance it out. Yeah.
Exactly. So
So,
I'm worried that potentially more sectors are going to be affected by his tariffs,
mhm.
but is it worth it in the long run? I believe so. I mean, people like to, I'm a Milton Friedman economics guy. They say, well, tariffs are a horrible thing because it gets passed on to consumers. Unfortunately, those Milton Friedman principles only applied when the free trade is unilateral.
Right.
And with China, for instance, the free trade is not at all unilateral.
Yep.
You have a mercantilist authoritarian state that their primary goal to keep peace in their region is to stimulate labor. And all of their laborers are virtually slave laborers. And I forecast that if the demand falls on the American side, which they rely on for their economy, falls enough because of higher prices, so on the China side, that they're just going to cut it in China,
Cut what?
essentially make up the difference of what it was costing those producers to make it, and then sell it with
Dumping, in other words.
essentially
Yeah.
stimulating their
Yeah.
their laborers to keep them employed so they don't have more bank runs.
And they're doing it anyway, that I can tell. They're building entire cities that nobody lives in. It's just to keep people working. Hey, let's build a city. So yeah, uh, and that's, I'm sure you'll agree with me. That's what I like about free trade, is because when a person such as myself goes into business, we look here, we look there, we consider every possibility of what's going to work best.
Mhm.
Instead of some pre-programmed program,
Right.
we're constantly adjusting to whatever the situation is. That doesn't just encourage efficiency; it pretty much demands efficiency. Because if you're not as efficient as the guy across the street that you're competing with, you lose. So yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. Uh, that's why I don't like, why we don't like, I don't think, top-down government, where people who never had a real job in their life, never run a business, think they know best.
Exactly.
And you even have in corporations people who've never really been in it.
Mhm.
Uh, they've been to what am I trying to say, business school, which
Mhm.
I don't knock. I'm not saying that's a bad idea, but that doesn't tell you everything. That doesn't give you all the experience you need by any means.
No, no, no.
Yeah. Speaking of which, let's talk about your background.
My background, well, I studied finance and political science
Mhm.
at the University of Cincinnati. I'm a commodity trader by nature. I worked in the jewelry business in Chicago for about a year and a half, and now I work for a private company that runs municipal and corporate bond funds, as well as manages a broad real estate portfolio and a real estate investment fund. So
Okay. So you're definitely familiar with capitalism anyway.
very familiar, very fond of it.
Yeah. Familiar with free markets, because
Yes.
that's exactly what you're doing.
Hmm.
Trying to find match buyers with sellers and so forth. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Um, well, we don't have to spend all evening talking about the economy or Trump or anything else.
Sure.
Uh, what else you got going on?
Oh man. Personal life, I'm moving into a new apartment.
Hmm.
Planning a wedding with my lovely fiance that I've known for, well, I've been dating for roughly 12 years now.
Yeah, well, it's about time to get married.
Yeah. Turning 27 on Saturday, so I'm late by yesteryear's standards, but probably early by today's. So
Yeah, yeah. It's funny how those things trend, because
exactly.
in my day, if you weren't married by 20, just about, there was something wrong with you. Then it went all the way up to 35 and 40. Now I guess it's coming back down.
So I've heard. So I've
Yeah,
heard.
yeah. And that makes you think, because with all my years of experience, I don't know how these trends really establish themselves always. They just seem to do. Uh,
Yeah, you blame it on. I mean, I blame it on social decay and
mm,
also a lack of religious basis within the population. In addition to that, back to top-down governments. Governments have made it increasingly harder for individuals and couples to get married earlier
I
because
think you're
of
right.
the economic
Yeah,
strain.
yeah,
I mean, mothers can't afford to take care of their own children, so then they
yeah,
have to have two incomes,
yeah,
and then they can't afford the child care.
yeah.
And if
And
you don't,
sometimes childcare, when you do all the math, the childcare takes everything the one spouse makes, so they might as well stay home anyway.
yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
yeah, there's all kinds of data and statistics and stuff you can look at, and I won't say I've poured over it, but it does seem that not just people's opinion, but actual math is that we have less buying power now than like in the 60s when I was your age, or 60s, 70s. And that just makes you think, because as a person who made things for a living, I can say that the efficiency of production is way up.
Absolutely.
So with the efficiency of production way up, that means costs should be going down, buying power should be going up, and it's not. Uh,
Right.
Something's going on, yeah.
Well, if there's any guess as to what's going on, it's the definition of inflation, which is too many dollars chasing too few
Yeah,
goods.
yeah,
And when we continuously print our own money, which I'm sure you know this, Chip, constitutionally, the federal government is not allowed to do this.
there's a lot of things the federal government is allowed to do. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And so as they print more, we lose
Yeah.
much more of our dollars.
Well, we lose value through inflation, but I'm even sidestepping that. Again, as a guy who makes things for a living, I can't get my head around build a house, for instance.
Mhm.
Let's just say they were building a house in 1960 and in 2024, 25, you want to build the identical house, or at least as close as you can based on what materials are available these days. You can build that same house in 2/3 the time, maybe even just half the time.
Mhm.
Uh, Materials themselves are being produced more efficiently. That doesn't mean they cost less, but at least in theory, they could cost less, apart from inflation and all that.
Mhm.
So why do the houses cost more? You know, I think for one thing, supply and demand. There's not enough houses being produced, um, and anytime there's a shortage of supply, what happens to price? Up. Uh,
You can also point to regulation
I was just
around
thinking
building
regulations, all the hoops you got to jump through to build a house anymore.
all houses. I
Yeah.
mean, indirect taxation aside, which is inflation,
Mhm.
you can point at direct taxation, which is on top of the regulation, which could be a tax in itself, depending on what type of regulation it is.
Yeah.
The taxes that are imposed on corporations and businesses,
And people.
small and individuals, has increased what it costs
Mhm.
for labor, for the person that's organizing the labor, and all the contractors
Yeah.
peripheral to that. So, yeah, that's essentially what is causing this dilemma.
Yeah. 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 It's kind of like that frog in the boiling water or whatever. A little bit at a time. A lot of this makes sense, but you just track it over time. And you say, well, wait a minute. You know, we're moving away from what we had before. We're ending up with less and working harder at it to get less.
Yeah,
And
usually,
then what do people say? Well, clearly we need more programs.
yeah, exactly.
The programs we've had so far haven't worked. We need more of them. You know, oh, for God's sake.
Yeah, usually once the frog realizes that it's boiling water, it's too late.
Yeah.
Luckily for us frogs here,
Well,
we have realized that the water has been boiling for a long time now, ever since they turned on the flame.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And but luckily for us, the country that we reside in is the global hegemonic power.
Yeah.
So I am nauseously optimistic that we can actually reverse course, return to our first principles as a nation, and restore that value.
Yeah. Not in a week or two. Not in one presidency, but over time. Yeah.
Certainly not.
Yeah.
But one, if done right, in the best case scenario, could provide us framework to gradually return there.
Yeah. But things have changed. They won't change back, and some of that's for the good. I'm not going to say
Yeah, absolutely.
everything was wonderful then and it's terrible now, because that's not the case. But I am officially a baby boomer and one of the older baby boomers. My experience growing up was post World War II,
Hmm.
and even though I wasn't born during World War II, it was so current in people's minds. They evaluate based on World War II.
Mhm.
You know, whatever they're experiencing. Well, compared to World War II, you know, it was to them it was just a few years ago. World War II ended. First of all, there was like 15 years in the world, and certainly in America, of really a tough situation. Roughly 10 years of depression and 5 years of war, getting round numbers.
Mhm.
People did without cars because they didn't, or either they couldn't afford them, businesses weren't producing them. and so forth. Housing, we'll talk about today, we'll talk about it then. So 15 years of needs not being met, and then but American productivity during World War II was the highest it had ever been because they had to feed the war.
Mhm.
Uh, so we had incredible productivity, incredible pent up demand. You can see something coming here. And then Europe was largely decimated. So they weren't after World War II jumping up and building a lot of cars or
Right.
building a lot of houses. That they were building a lot of houses, but they were replacing ones that had been destroyed.
Yeah.
So they were a long time just getting back to where they started from. We were zooming ahead. So yeah, it was real easy to be an American back then. Um, just incredibly good times because we were in a great place. I hope that never happens again because the only way that's going to happen again is another big war.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's more competitive now. We're competing with China. China is largely winning. Uh, in my childhood, after World War II, China was a backwater country. Um, that's one of the things I fondly reference is that Japan had been one of our major enemies in World War II. Well, in the 1950s and going into the 60s, uh, the stuff we bought largely said made in Japan,
Mhm.
you know, not made in China. Nothing came from China. Everything came from Japan.
Right.
Uh, and then Nixon and Carter and others, as things progressed, they started normalizing relations with China. Capitalists decided, hey, let's move all these expensive jobs in America where people expected a decent paycheck. Let's move them to China and pay them next to nothing.
Mhm.
That'll make product cheap, and so Americans can buy those cheap products uh, or less. But you can't keep doing that, you know. And we're seeing it. We're feeling it now. China's people in China are doing better. In America, we're doing maybe hanging in there, maybe doing worse. But if you don't have whether it's a person or a family or a neighborhood or a city or a state, if you aren't putting more out there than you're bringing in, you can just count the days till it caves in on you. And we're kind of there. So we better start producing our own stuff and shipping it out.
Yeah, I partially disagree. I think Americans writ large do not want to return to being a predominantly product
Well, but
producing
why not?
economy. Well, because then we have to, so being the global hegemonic power,
Mhm.
we essentially have globalized the free trade, and our dollars are used to settle the vast majority of all
So far.
transactions worldwide so far, and
Yeah.
that hegemony is being threatened by
Mhm.
countries in the BRICS alliance. I won't go through all of them.
Yeah.
And this is the U.S. petrodollar. So Saudi Arabia just came out of the U.S. petrodollar agreement, which was, I believe, a 50-year agreement. Might have been a 100-year agreement. I think it's a 50-year agreement. And if the US currency becomes at par with other nations' currencies, our citizenry won't have the global buying power that we do now.
Yeah.
And that leg up, or two legs up, depending on the country that we have now, allows us to not be major producers of
Well,
any major
well, if you're
goods.
born rich, you have the luxury of not being a major producer, but that doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it good, and it doesn't mean you can count on it forever.
You can't count on it forever, but I think you would agree that it's better to be rich than not be rich.
Well, I'll just be the devil's advocate here because I know examples, I'm sure you do too,
Mhm.
of in fact people who were born rich never were responsible for themselves, and now they aren't capable of being responsible for themselves. Now, understand, I know even more rich people who handle things just fine,
That's right.
but if a person who's been kind of isolated from personal responsibility, they get to be an adult. They don't even get it. much less have a means to make it happen.
I would agree.
And I think you can do that with an entire country.
Yes, but the cost of that, which perhaps in the long run, I'll grant you, would be good for us, just as for the national ethos. Having a global reserve currency and being that hegemonic power, it allows us to live all encompassingly, even the lowest of class, in much higher quality of life. But if we weren't the reserve currency, we would share some of the burden of all the other countries. I mean, I wouldn't really agree with you that China is necessarily doing better than us writ large because
I don't mean when I say better, that's qualitative. I'm not saying that, but they cleaned our clock as far as productivity, and you say, okay, that's fine. I say, not so much. But before we go any farther, we started off with you pointing out that the federal government shouldn't necessarily be printing money, doesn't even have a constitutional right to print it.
correct.
It's been screwing it up badly by putting more money out there than the economy can properly absorb. But now you're turning around and saying, but it's good because it's the world currency. Well, it seems like you're trying to have it both ways.
Well, I wouldn't say that we necessarily have to print our own dollars to remain the global reserve currency. We are the global reserve currency because we dominate so many transactions that are settled throughout the world. And we have essentially a monopoly on through trade agreements with oil producing countries and our oil production as well. All nations require oil to, I mean,
At the very least, energy. Yeah.
energy, but
And,
vis-a-vis petroleum
yeah,
and natural gas, and you know, look at countries like India, for example. The only reason they're coming up to second world nations is because of oil. If we weren't able to help them through trade with that oil, they would not be coming up the ladder. They would be staying third or be demoting to fourth.
yeah.
Now, to your point, I I do want us to remain the global hegemonic power because then we won't experience things quality of life wise like India or China.
Devil's advocate again. How sure can you be that we can maintain that? And what if BRICS or somebody comes along? If they're going to do something, they're going to have some amount of effect. The question is how much. Uh, then what happens?
So I remain optimistic that we will remain the reserve currency because the nations that are syndicating the BRICS reserve currency are inherently unstable nations. Russia, as we know, and China as well, if they want to seize your assets, they will seize them if you go against the state.
Yeah.
Our country is on its way towards that level of authoritarianism, but we are not there yet. And the ingenuity that comes out of America, that American ingenuity, because we take the best of the best and sometimes the worst of the worst from all of the nations in the world and aggregate just such high levels of talent.
Yeah, but
We're able to innovate at levels that those countries are not allowed to innovate.
absolutely. But that's like you're changing horses in midstream now. We were talking financial. Now we're talking about innovation and brain power.
Well, they're not. They're not mutually exclusive.
Well, certainly not. No.
So,
Matter of fact, that a lot better if they are exclusive. Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So the innovation that we produce here at home, as well as our systems of, you call it under the law, financial equality. That allows us to be the most trusted nation to all other nations outside of the BRICS countries. Keep in mind, all of those BRICS countries still rely on America to a vast degree. India would be nothing without America.
Yeah.
Russia, Putin came out the other day and said, we still hold a lot of US dollars and we are not moving away from that anytime soon. The other thing is no NATO countries are approaching BRICS and asking to join. And these are major, I mean, these are the other superpowers in the world order. These are all strong allies that as long as we don't completely crush ourselves at home and alienate them, there's no reason for them to go to BRICS. So we can remain, and on top of the NATO point, our military is unrivaled.
Okay, well, Sam knows a thing or two about finances and things that are going on around the world. It's never as simple as we like to believe. So if you'd like to learn more, check out episode 2 with Sam on Conversations with Real People at Individualists Unite. I am the Radical Individualist, and a commercial. 2084, The Reawakening, one of the most promising dystopian novels you'll ever read. So if you want to find out how an individualist who works in the government sees that the government is way too unresponsive, lethargic, autocratic, totalitarian, all that good stuff. If you want to see how one person can make a difference, this is the novel for you, available at Amazon and any number of other places. Thanks for watching.